Hey, this is Tony Nagy, and we're here on the third floor in the repair shop at Gruhn Guitars. And today I'd like to talk about the continued restoration of this 1941 Super Jumbo 100 by Gibson Guitars. When I say continued restoration, that is, there's still things left to do, but I'd like to talk about what's happened up till this point and might give you some insight as far as how we make decisions on what to do to vintage instruments, because there's always this balancing act, some between collectability and having a useful tool, like having a usable instrument. Now, there are some instruments, especially earlier ones, that are more collectible than they are usable, in that they're delicate, or maybe something's happened to them that's made them not usable as an instrument. But this is not the case with this, and as I go through what's been done to it and what was done to it before we had it, maybe it'll give you a little insight how we make those kind of decisions. So what has been done to this instrument is that actually when we got it, it was in fairly bad disrepair. There were some bad repairs. The neck set attempt had been made, and when I say neck set, that means adjusting the angle of the neck so that the strings are close enough to the fingerboard to be playable. And someone had done that, made an attempt, and they had really done a lot of damage to this heel here. So what I had to do was carefully take the neck off the instrument using primarily steam to loosen it up and get into this joint. And after I had done that, before I got to it, the heel had been cracked, and this is a two-piece maple neck with a little center strip in the middle here, and that part had come apart and the heel had been cracked. So basically we had three pieces here. And so to cure that, what I did after I got it out of the body, I epoxied those back together. First, I actually had to kind of steam them back into position, because sometimes when people steam things apart, they warp, and so I had to get it back into position so the pieces would glue back together. And then after I had epoxied the heel into its correct shape, and then I used carbon fiber strips inlaid on the inside next to the dovetail to use as strengthener. So when you epoxy carbon fiber in there, it makes this part quite strong, so that you can use it to hold the neck on the way it's supposed to. So I did all of that before I actually set the angle of the neck. Another thing I had to consider when that was happening was underneath here is what we'll call an extension ramp, I'll call it that. Underneath, usually on a flat top, the fingerboard can lie flat against the top. But on this, actually, there's more wood that goes underneath the extension as it goes over the top. And so that actually came off. And so I had to put that back on, and as I angled the neck back, whenever you do that, there's often if you think about it mechanically, you angle it back and it goes up like this, it creates a space underneath. And if you actually glue it down with that space, then there's this huge drop off here, and it really makes these frets at the end unusable, because they're out of the plane of being straight with the rest of the fingerboard. So whenever we do neck sets, we actually put some more material underneath here, and then we do cosmetic repairs to make it blend with everything else that was already there. So that's also what I had to do here. There was a bit of a lifted ramp underneath this fingerboard, and I actually had to add more material and then make it look like that it was a part of what was already there. So that's another, and to do all of that, I had to take all the binding off the fingerboard. So on this so far, what I had to do, what we've talked about, is the neck set, putting this extension back underneath here and making it so it connected to the fingerboard and the top the way that it's supposed to. And I also replaced the nut and the saddle. Now at the bridge, what someone had done, they had made a great big bone saddle, probably as thick as my pinky finger here, and they kind of gouged out a great big hole, looked like with a kitchen knife when I saw it. So I had to replace that wood, put back wood that looks just like this rosewood, and then cut a new slot for this pocket saddle right here, as well as gluing this bridge back to the top. So these are all, usually all old guitars, when we talk about pre-war Martins or old Gibsons, we'll often have to do re-gluing bridges and doing net sets and refrets, are just, we call it the trifecta. They're really standard restoration repairs because over time, what happens with when strings after up 80 to 100 years old, they start with string tension, they just start to compress like this, and the angle changes of everything, and so that's why we have to set the neck angle back so that we can make them playable instruments. So on this instrument, also we have to decide about how much time we want to spend fixing something to be a functional tool, as opposed to making it as cosmetically perfect as possible as far as collectability. So on this, right now, we've taken it to the point that it's a really functional instrument. We've got the neck at the proper angle. It's been refretted, new nut, new saddle, bridge is glued on. We're using some repro tuners because we didn't have any that were exactly from that period that were the right kind of tuners that went on here. So we got as close as we can in repros. And this instrument actually sounds amazing. It's so we know this is going to be a useful tool for someone. Now the other things that we've decided we've looked at, we noticed that on the neck there's a lot of finish missing here, and someone has unfortunately tried to do some touch-ups with color that doesn't match, and there's just a lot of chips and chunks out of here because over time, this lacquer gets really brittle, and it's easy to flake off, and if somebody is playing it with rings on or things of that nature, just not taking care of it, you knock all these pieces off, and it can be kind of rough to play. So I look at this and I think that this is it's a nice collector's piece, but it's also a really great player's instrument. So the next step for this in the restoration is I need to make this neck surface look better and feel good. So that's going to be the next step in this. I'm going to do touch-ups on here, drop fills to fill in where these pieces of finish are missing, until this is a really better looking playable surface. And the other thing that we decided to have to do, because although having useful tools is like the major part of making it for somebody, aesthetic does matter. Like if this instrument was in this this age, this vintage, but it was somebody had painted it purple sparkle, nobody would want to buy it. Aesthetic matters. People that buy old guitars want them that sound like old guitars and look like old guitars. We've got this one a bad decision in a repair right here that we're also going to fix that as well. Obviously some kind of damage had happened, and somebody had tried to replace the piece of mahogany here that was broken out, and it's just not really aesthetically pleasing, and it'll affect somebody's desire to take the instrument and use it. So that's also the next step that's going to happen. From here to here, we're going to basically refinish this side and try to make it look like it belongs to this side. So and that way then it'll be both aesthetically pleasing, as it should be. We don't want it to look new because it's a vintage instrument, but also useful as a tool. So here's Tony at Gruhn Guitars in 1941 Super Jumbo 100.